Hello to everyone joining us right now. I'm going to give folks a minute or so to get all logged in now that we're getting started. And I will take this opportunity to welcome you all virtually to Chevalier's Books. We are Los Angeles's oldest independent bookstore, celebrating 81 years this year. We're excited that we can host so many of you in a virtual space when our actual shop is fairly small. So this gives us a nice opportunity. Thank you again, all of you, for joining us. This is a webinar format. So if you have questions for Michael Connelly during the course of the event, you can use the Q&A function down here at the bottom, and I'll be able to see those and bring your questions to him as the time together progresses. And I have one more very important announcement that I almost forgot. You can buy your signed copy of The Dark Hours from Chevalier's, and I will put that link in the chat right now, and then again throughout the course of the event. And we will be shipping those out as soon as Michael comes in to sign. So we're looking forward to that as well. And now, without further ado, thank you to all of you who are in here and attending this evening. I am going to play a video that Michael made to start this evening.
Hey, Michael Connelly here. I'll be talking to you live in a few minutes in our virtual book event, but I thought, since the pandemic, there's been so many of these virtual events. They all seem to run together and be the same to me. So I thought maybe I'd start this one off with a Dark Hours tour. The book's called The Dark Hours. It's set here in Los Angeles and Hollywood. And I'm just going to show you a few of the places that are important in the book. So here we go with the Dark Hours tour. So now we're on Cahuenga Boulevard heading south into Hollywood, and this is actually where the book starts. It starts on New Year's Eve this year, and there's a unsavory tradition in Hollywood of people shooting guns into the air, and what goes up must come down. So the best thing to do is to be under something that can protect you. And more than one police officer has told me over the years that when they worked in Hollywood and they had to work on New Year's Eve, they would find a freeway overpass and park underneath it. And so this is the Hollywood freeway overpass on Cahuenga Boulevard, and where this book starts is with Renee Ballard and her partner, Detective Moore, parked right here, surrounded by what has become all too prevalent in Los Angeles, homeless encampment, and they're waiting out the onslaught of bullets that are going to come down when the clock strikes midnight. And it's the setting, it's the first chapter, but it's also the setting of what's going on in the city since the pandemic and post George Floyd. A lot of things going on in the department, a lot of questions about how we should be policing ourselves, how the police view themselves, and all this is coming about in the conversation between Ballard and her temporary partner, Detective Moore. So this is the starting point, and hopefully we can talk more about it during our virtual discussion. There's no spoilers on this tour. I'm talking about where I'm taking you to locations that are in the early pages of the book. Maybe you know these places, and if you don't, maybe it will help you visualize what's in the book. So while under the underpass, Ballard, who's the detective who takes on any calls that occur, she gets called to the scene of a homicide. Someone has been shot. And I chose this street. This is Gower. And I like this street because it's a border. On the left side here, it's very dark because we're at night here, but it's Paramount Pictures. And on the right side is a marginal neighborhood where I think there's a lot of crime and so forth. And so I happen to be familiar with this frame shop, this auto repair shop that works on frames, and I decided to use their parking lot for the location of where this murder occurs. This is just kind of perfect Hollywood, that this is a working auto repair yard. A lot of wrecks in there and stuff, but at the same time you can see filming available. I guess when you're across the street from the back end of Paramount, you do what you can do. And so very quickly in the book, Detective Ballard is off to the races, and what happens is she connects this case to a guy named Harry Bosch, who was a retired detective who worked on a similar case. So she seeks him out quite early in the book. Again, no spoiler here. She seeks him out to get his knowledge, and he's been mentoring her for a few books now, and she has to seek him out again. And then we have our pair, and they're everything is set, and then hopefully you enjoy the ride through the book. Okay, we're on the day side now for a little bit, and I'm at Bird's, one of Harry Bosch's most favorite restaurants in Los Angeles, and it plays a key part in the book, The Dark Hours. All I can say is Harry loves the chicken here. He comes here a lot, whether to sit or to take it to go. So cheers. We're on Woodrow Wilson Drive here in the Hollywood Hills, just near Mulholland Drive. And this is Montcalm Avenue. And the first time I came here was about 35 years ago. And I came as a newspaper reporter, and there's a murder right here on the asphalt right below my door here. A woman had been found shot to death at like 7 a.m. in the morning. And murders in the Hollywood Hills are pretty rare. But one on the street is very rare, and it helped newspaper-wise or story-wise that there were celebrities tangentially involved. This was the home of a famous painter named David Hockney. So, murder victim found on the street in front of his house. They sent me up the hills to be there. And at that time, I was writing the first book with Harry Bosch, and I was looking for a place for him to live. I had this idea that if he can afford it as a detective, that he would live in a house that gave him at least somewhat of a view of the city that he works in and protects and solves murders in. So I drove up there to that place where the murder was, and the street was closed off with yellow tape, crime scene tape. And because it was a Hollywood Hills murder, there was a lot of media there, so we were all waiting for the LAP to come to the tape and say something. And what transpired was it was going on, and so I kind of slipped away, got back in my car, and started driving down, because on my way up I saw something that drew my attention. And what it was down here there was a house that had burned down. It was a cantilever house, kind of jutting out over the open canyon on metal girders, and it apparently had burned down, and they cleared all the debris, and it was just a platform. And so I drove back down here and went under more crime scene tape, or danger tape, yellow tape. Don't go out on here because it might be dangerous. And I went out to check out the view, and that's how I found Harry Bosch's house on Woodrow Wilson. And what's curious about it is that, you know, I wanted it to be realistic, and how could a cop on a detective salary own a home with a view in the Hollywood Hills? And so that's where I also created this idea that he had been involved in a case that Hollywood made a movie out of, and he had been paid for the use of his name and likeness and the case, his information about the case, and that's how he was able to afford to buy the house. And this is where it's at. And the curious thing to me is that whenever I discovered this place, maybe 35 years ago, no house has ever been built on that spot. It's just, nothing is there, but you can see the view. So why don't we take a look? So this is where Harry Bosch's house is in the books, and this is his view. That's Universal City out there. You can even see Harry Potter's castle, and then the mountains beyond on the other side of the valley. So that's what I liked about it. There's city lights at night, but also some of the canyon view. And the curiosity, or the mystery within the mystery, is that nothing was ever built here. So this spot has been vacant now for 30 plus years. And I don't know why that is, because it is a great view. It's been good enough for Harry for most of his adult life. And as far as that murder goes, that was solved, and it was an ex-cop who committed it. It was an ex-wife of his, and she was a nurse who worked for an older gentleman on that street, Montcalm Avenue. And she was the night nurse, and she had completed her work for the night and was driving home. She saw someone lying in the street, and being a nurse, she stopped her car and jumped out to see if the person needed help. And it turned out it was her ex, and he turned and shot her and left her there in the street. And it took a while, several months, to put it all together, but eventually that was a murder that was solved. So we're heading south on Cahuenga Boulevard into Hollywood. So we're going to cross over the Pilgrimage Bridge, which cuts across the Hollywood Freeway, and that will take us into the Dell, where a lot of the story of the dark hours takes place. I really have tried to kind of consolidate the storytelling into this area. The Hollywood Dell is one of the oldest neighborhoods in Hollywood and Los Angeles, and a lot of old homes going up into the hills, up into the Hollywood Reservoir. And for me, things kind of come full circle, because my first book, The Black Echo, dealt with a homicide, a murder victim found in a drainage pipe up at the Hollywood Reservoir. And in this new book, we have a variety of crimes that kind of start up in the Hollywood Dell and then go down into Hollywood. And so on a geographic level, to me, it's all very tightly woven. We're also right on the other side of this hill is the Hollywood Bowl. And so there's a lot of like iconic Hollywood here. And then the residential area, where in the dark hours a lot of crimes occur. And one thing I found when I was researching this book, and I kind of became fascinated by, was how neighborhoods in Los Angeles are, many of them are defined by their streetlights, and many are protective of their streetlight designs and don't want changes. I think the tendency of the city government is to homogenize everything and modernize everything, but you have old neighborhoods like in the Hollywood Dell where they stand opposed to changing their streetlights, and it can become a political fight and so forth. And I found that really fascinating. And so then my job, what I tried to do in the book, is turn it, account for the politics and the differences in the design and the style and what they say about communities, but also use it in some way to tell the story. And so that's what you have with Renee Ballard, who's the protagonist of this book, who is going to notice this, become aware of it, and realize there's something connecting streetlights to a pattern of sexual assaults that's going on in Hollywood. And that to me was, when you're researching a book, you're looking for ways of staying plugged in and being interested. And that really kept me plugged in, and I found myself at night driving around the different parts of the city looking at particular street lights and the nicknames for them and the real names for the different designs. And so like what you have in the Hollywood Dell, not all the streets have street lights, but those that do have them going back more than 50 years, and they're called the acorn top street lights. And so all this to the left is all the Hollywood Dell. Like I say, it's an old Hollywood neighborhood, and it goes up and up and up. And here's an example of a street light that's pretty old. It's the acorn style, and this plays into the dark hours in a significant way. There's a panel at the bottom where they can access the wires and so forth that keep the light lighted, and that becomes a clue for Ballard as she works through this case. And in the course of her investigation, Ballard even comes to the Bureau of Street Lighting, where you can see all the different examples of street lights in Los Angeles. I found out about all this. I kind of ran into an expert who schooled me on all the different styles of street lights in the city and the politics involved and all that, by John Wellborn, who happens to be the publisher and editor of the Larchmont Chronicle. And so he is actually becomes a character in the book, The Dark Hours, and that's a little way of me thanking him for his help with this book. Okay, we're back in the dark hours again. So we're coming up on where Renee Ballard works, where Harry Bosch used to work, the Hollywood Police Station, or the Hollywood Division of the Los Angeles Police Department. Right here, brick building, brick fortress, in case things go sideways. And spent a lot of time here researching the books, researching the character, and of course also filming the Bosch TV show. I know a lot of you know all these places, but I've noticed on these virtual events that people seem to tune in sometimes from all over the world. So there's a little bit of education of people who have never been to Los Angeles, and then also showing people who have been here some of the familiar sights. And so our final stop on this tour is none other than Chevalier's books. Here we are. So let's get this virtual event going.
Oh, well, that was such a delight. I've gotten to see that twice now. And each time I spot more places that I love around Los Angeles. Um, and oh, here we go. Now I get to bring the star of the evening on. Um, Welcome, Michael. Thank you for taking us on a tour of all the locations, or well, not all of them, but many key locations that give us no spoilers. Um, and bearing in mind that this is a mystery and you don't want to spoil things for folks, I figured I would try and ask questions that don't give a lot of plot away, but I think help ease us into the world of the dark hours. And my first question is how you decided, why you decided to sort of keep things in our actual reality. I know some folks have ignored the pandemic in writing about contemporary things, and some folks have written the last almost 2 years in. Was there much of a decision in deciding to set this in the pandemic and not ignore it?
Yeah, well, first let me say thanks for having me. That video is fun to do, and I need to mention that it was put together by a writer and filmmaker named Terrell Lee Langford, who we've collaborated on a lot of stuff over the years. And I thought it turned out pretty good. Just a couple nights, one night, one day, kind of cruising around. It's fun to do. So, and again, thank you to Chevalier's Books for having me. And I hope people support LA's oldest independent bookstore. That's great. Survivor. Yeah, so the book, it wasn't a long decision-making process, because I've been doing this all along. I'm coming up on 30 years of publishing books, and I've always set the books in the year they're published, and I've always reflected somewhat on what's going on in the world. And I think that's the reporter in me. I was a reporter in LA for a long time before I started writing these books. And, that's what I wanted to bring to it, a reporter's eye to crime fiction, and use that genre and the frame of a investigation to also say, this is what's going on out there. And, I also like titles that mean different things at different times. So the dark hours, of course, Renee works the midnight shift. She works in the dark hours. But I also feel that with what this country's gone through in the last year or so, from pandemic to a summer of protests after the George Floyd murder, and then you start this year off with the what happened at the Capitol. It's been a rough time, and so to me, it was feeling like the dark hours of American society, and especially American policing. And so I wanted to have that aspect reflected in the book, not in an overarching way. It's the story's about a very fierce and relentless woman investigating two pretty significant cases and being unstoppable despite the barricades or the obstacles of pandemic and general apathy that has settled over the police department. And so, again, it's a crime investigation, it's a crime novel, but you delineate your character by the obstacles you put in front of her or him. And the last year we got lots of obstacles I could use, and I think that's just really part of the story.
Yeah. With the representations or right off the bat of different attitudes within the police force, in light specifically of what happened with George Floyd, protest movements across the US, a lot of calls for defunding the police. Did the sort of variety of perspectives come from police officers? I know you do a lot of research, you have a lot of connections.
Yeah, I mean, I have I would say a small cadre of people that have been helping me for a long time with the books. They're either still in the department or still very close to it and connected. And they usually get me to people that I want to talk to about it. And so, yeah, I think it's a pretty accurate portrait of what's going on. There's a general apathy. And I think that's the irony, that there's all this talk a year ago about defunding the police, and no, that will never happen. And it turns out they defunded themselves in a way, because, you know, the LAPD at least, you know, ran out of their budget, ran dry because of all the extra overtime and so forth dealing with the protests. And that resulted in a series of cutbacks in service and in units, and you know, and that's got to have an effect on the outlook of officers, especially if there's officers like Renee Ballard, who you know, is you know, it's Harry Bosch's phrase, everybody counts or nobody counts, but she falls, that's in her DNA. And so, you know, it's a tough year for her. It's been a tough year, and it's a tough time for her to see this happening. But I do stand by. I mean, no one's challenging me on it. I think it's pretty accurate. This is what's going on in our police department.
Yeah, that really struck me in having followed Renee Ballard from the Late Show, just that tenacity she has. And here it's, you know, more people who are not necessarily willing to go out of their way to help her, but now it's a lot about general malaise with what's happening within the police force. I also really enjoyed just seeing a lot of my own commute every morning on the way to work. I was like, oh yeah, I drive down Gower. I'm like, I have never encountered, you know, a murder on my way to work yet. I should probably find some wood. But are there, in addition to, you know, having known that lot, were there any, I guess, real cases, you know, people dying during the January 1st flood of bullets that you drew from at all in creating the scene or working on the forensic element that gets explored?
Not really. In fact, when I started it, I don't know, many people haven't read the book yet. So essentially the very first chapter, Renee and her partner at the moment are taking shelter under the 101 freeway, as I explained in the video, because people shoot their guns in the air. And so I was thinking, like, wouldn't that be a really difficult case to solve if someone was hit by a bullet that fell during that, you know, barrage of gunfire at strike midnight? But I did some research, and some experts told me that a bullet, what goes up does come down, but when it comes down, it doesn't have the same velocity that it is when it's fired out of the barrel of a gun, and that it most likely would not be fatal. And then I also found remember that show Mythbusters? They actually did an episode on that, where they also concluded that it would not penetrate your skull. And then, you know, and so I decided, well, there goes that plot. So I continued, and, you know, and what Renee finds out very quickly, again, I'm not spoiling stuff, is that someone used the cover of this, everyone firing guns, to actually intentionally shoot someone and murder them. And so it's actually more sinister. And so it's actually a good thing that my research said, nah, that would never happen, because ultimately that would be an accident, let alone the difficulty of trying to figure out who fired that weapon. Ultimately, it would be an accident, you know, not an intended death. And, you know, that's tough to carry that 400 pages. So I'm glad that my research pointed me in another direction, and it became a very sinister thing. And when she connects it to an old case that Harry Bosch had worked, that was really where the inspiration came from. The old case is based on a real case. In a lot of close details, it's based on a real case that I knew about. And that was one of the starting points for the story.
That's fantastic. I have some questions in the Q&A here, but I did also want to ask, I know that Harry is generally retired from his own series, but do you think you'll ever stop wanting to draw him in on cases with Renee, with Mickey? I know he and Harry show up with each other frequently.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that, hopefully it's not for a while, but I hope whatever the last book I write or the last day I'm writing, I'm hoping I'm writing about Harry Bosch. He's just a character that I really connect with, and from the writing standpoint, know I can use him to explore whatever I want to explore. I'm coming up on 30 years. 30th anniversary of my first book being published is in a couple months, and that was a Harry Bosch book. So how fortunate is that I'm still writing about this guy 30 years later, and I definitely feel like I'm not finished. I'm not finished telling his story. I am, my books are in real time. The city evolves, Harry evolves. So he's getting up there, and that's why he quit being a policeman. But I know of several police officers and detectives, retired detectives, who are still at it. They still have the skills. They might not be able to physically run down a killer, but they can follow clues and links and determine who that killer is, and then maybe Renee can run that person down. So it's a good team to have. Harry, in the nearing 70 years old, and Renee very, very much younger than him, and they like I said, they have the same DNA when it comes to investigating homicides, and so they work well together. And in terms of I don't know what the right word is, gimmick or whatever, the connecting them is what's keeping Harry alive in terms of literary life. I think him finding ways of breaking off pieces of an official investigation that Renee Ballard is conducting is what's keeping him going, both in the fictional world and in my world of writing about him.
Yeah, well, based mostly on the number of comments throughout our time together so far, I think everyone here is thrilled to know that you will be writing about Harry for forever.
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, I've already started my next book, and he's in it. He's actually the lead. He's not the lead in this book. He's a supporting character actor, whatever you want to say. But in the next book, he's the lead, and Renee will be the supporting person. This book, this is not really a spoiler, but I would say that this book ends with a big question on which direction Renee goes with her life, and I'm going to answer that in the next book. But we're going to see it through Harry Bosch's eyes, not her eyes.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. That's very, very exciting. I've enjoyed seeing things through Renee's perspective, but I look forward to having that turned back on her a little bit. Oh, so many good questions.
I have to laugh. Someone wrote, "Can you add a photo of the real Harry Bosch?" And there is no real Harry Bosch. He's fiction. And it's funny. I write the way I read. I don't give a whole lot of details of description and so forth, because when I read a book, I love creating an image in my head. And so that's the way I write. I want people to create their own image of Harry Bosch. So I have one of him in my head, but I don't have a picture of the real Harry Bosch.
Has the picture in your head come to look more like Titus Welliver over the course of the TV series, or do they remain distinct in your mind?
It's interesting. They're distinct visually because I was 20 years into writing about Harry before Titus took that role. So he's not been able to knock the image out of my head. Plus the Bosch I'm writing about in the books and in my head is almost 10 years older than Titus. So that hasn't happened yet, but his voice is definitely, I hear Titus's voice and when I'm writing the books. And and I've also, he does the audio books as well, and he does a good job with that. So definitely his voice, and that's important because I usually get my inspiration for stories through hearing a story, I have oral inspiration, I guess you call it, that usually a detective or maybe a defense lawyer or something will tell me about a case they had or tell me about some experience they had. And it's them telling it and the timbre of their voice as emotions come into it. That's where I get inspired. And so it's interesting to me that Titus's voice is in my head when I'm writing these books.
Mm. I like the way those have connected then for you. Someone in the chat asked if you think they'll ever do any movies based on Harry Bosch. And I don't know if you want to talk about what's next in the world of Bosch on film or streaming.
No, there's a TV show. It came to a conclusion in 7 seasons in April, and but we're starting a spinoff that's going to be on IMDb TV that will continue the story. In my books, Bosch retired from being a cop and became a private investigator, and that's where we're at with the spinoff. It's Harry, the PI. And we've just actually wrapped filming on the first season of that, and that will be out in hopefully early to mid next year. We also wrapped a show called Lincoln Lawyer, based on those books. That's going to be on Netflix next year as well. And I've seen both of these shows. I mean, I'm involved in the shows, so I know what we have, and both are very good.
Okay.
Really happy with them.
Oh, that's great. I will say for everyone who's joining us, you will get possibly additional glimpses of Larchmont Boulevard in the spinoff. We got to see folks filming. Mostly we saw the camera set up down the street at one point. And we were like, oh, there's more Bosch things happening. So it'll be a thrill for everyone who knows the neighborhood.
Yeah, we film a lot in Hancock Park. It's a great neighborhood, but it's also very close to the studio where the show's made. I could actually walk to Chevalier's. Probably take me 20 minutes to walk there from the studio. So we're all in the same neighborhoods. That's one reason why I'm really happy to be doing this and helping to support independent bookstores.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Oh, let's see. So I like this one. Do you ever miss working in the newsroom?
I did. What I missed was the camaraderie of a newsroom. I'm way past it now, but I went from being in a newsroom where there's a lot of people, a lot of joking, pranking, just discussion of what's going on in the world. You can, at a newsroom, it's probably a false feeling, but you feel like you're on the edge of what's going on. And I went from that to like being in a room by myself and writing my books. There was a couple of years of a difficult transition, but I'm well past that now. And then when I got involved in writing the TV shows, I had a lot of that feeling come back. The writing room, it's about 6-7 writers and assistants and all that in a kind of a boardroom style room, and you sit around the table and you kick the story around and you start putting notes up on the walls and stuff like that. And it really very much reminded me of a newsroom. We're all writers, we're all talking things out, and it was just very similar. So I've kind of got that back now.
Yeah, I feel like the TV writers room is probably the least lonely way to be a professional creative writer out there.
Yeah.
Let's see. I I like this one as well. Are you curious as to why the lot where Harry Bosch resides has never been developed? If so, have you researched the property records or discovered anything about that space?
No, I haven't. It's just going to be a mystery. It did have a wood, I checked by there. I don't live too far from it either. And so over the years, I've gone by there, and it used to have, as I said on the video, that there was a fire. They cleared off the debris, and it had a platform on these metal cantilevers. And over time, it was a wood platform. It rotted and fell through, and then they just had these metal pillars sticking up, and then those were removed. And on the video, you can see some concrete stuff. So it looked like an attempt had been made to build something new there, and then it was abandoned. And it's just one of those weird things in LA, that a property would be left undeveloped for going on 30 plus years.
Yeah, I would imagine, I mean, the existence of the Bureau of Streetlights that we got to see, which is one of my favorite things to drive home past, indicates that there are a lot of rules about what you can do with building and things. I'm like, where that house is, there are a lot of rules and regulations about building, so I can see why it would be hard. Someone else said they haven't been to Birds, but they always enjoy the restaurant recommendations. And that when they're in LA, they always make a stop at Musso's, which makes me wonder, of all of the various restaurants, bars, etc., that have shown up in your books, do you have a favorite?
I don't know. I have a lot of favorites. It depends on what you want to have. I think Dan Tana's has like the best steak in town. I love Mozza for Italian food. So and Musso's is a regular thing. Actually, Musso's is hard to get into, but I try to get there when I can, and I eat a lot of different things there. It's funny how you should probably just go to a place for the food, but I think the inclusion of history is somehow makes like a visit to a restaurant more enjoyable. And Musso's is actually older than Chevalier's, so it's kind of, there's a lot of good stuff to choose from in the city. And again, that comes out of like just trying to be realistic with my writing. Like, I don't make up places. I only put in real restaurants, and the restaurants I go to a lot, or I've visited because I got a recommendation from a cop or something like that. I get a lot of that. Like, Harry Bosch would love this place. Usually it's stuff like Pink's hot dogs and stuff that people think cops don't eat that well. And they're probably right about that.
Yeah, until I.
By the way, I'm sorry. That makes me sound like I'm saying Pink's is not good food. It's actually very, very good. So no, everyone go to Pink's. I don't want to be accused of saying it's unhealthy or anything like that. I'm a big hot dog fan myself.
Yeah, and they have multiple vegan options too, which is exciting if you want to be super healthy. But I had not realized that Birds was a popular place for cops, because it's right next to UCB. So I'm used to it being a place popular for young improvising comedians. And I was like, oh, what an interesting combination of people hang out at Birds.
Yeah, you can go in there and lunch, and you will quite often see cops from Hollywood Division there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this question. Do you know how many books you mention Vin Scully in?
Do I know
There's
how
not
many?
an answer here, but yeah.
No, I don't. I dedicated one book to him, but I'm from somewhere else. I didn't move to LA till I was 30, and and so he was already iconic by the time I got here. But a detective that helps me with my books, and I just saw a question. Somebody said, "Is Rick Jackson I think the soul of Harry Bosch?" And that might be accurate. Um, Harry Bosch has followed the pattern of Rick Jackson, who's now retired from the LAPD, but still solving murders as a volunteer investigator, and he's Harry's age. So he's been a big inspiration for me. And he always, like many, like probably millions, if not hundreds of thousands of people, he grew up listening to Vin Scully and falling asleep listening to Dodgers on the radio. And I just thought that's such a lovely memory that I had to steal that and give it to Harry. And we were talking about Titus's voice and so forth. I mean, I posit in the books that the voice of Los Angeles is Vin Scully, and I still believe that.
Yeah, yeah. Even a few years after his retirement, I think that's still very, very true. I have a couple questions that are related. I'll kind of pair them together. The first is whether you ever feel a desire to write about a different city. And the second is, have you ever thought about sending Bosch to another location or state to solve a case?
Yeah, I don't know. I've not been drawn to write about a different character in a different city. I just feel like whatever I want to say as a writer, wherever I want to go with the story, I can do it in Los Angeles. But what's a very attractive thing is the fish out of water story. And so I've taken Harry to Mexico a couple of times. I did a book where he went to Hong Kong for at least half the book. And that was probably my biggest fish out of water. I've taken him to Florida on a case, and of course to Las Vegas. So you can do a lot of that kind of stuff, but I always feel that he's got to be tethered to Los Angeles. Things have to start in LA, and then I can take him somewhere. But you also have to be sparing with the fish out of water. It's fun to do, but I think one thing that connects Harry to people is that you sense in your bones that he knows the city so well, and that's part of the connection to readers. And so you don't want to play around with that too much. So it's the fish out of water stuff is seldom. Or big intervals in between that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, this question comes from Chevalier's co-owner, Bert Deixler, and I wish he'd told me ahead of time because my copy of the book he asks about is just out of reach. He asks, I wonder what you thought about your former colleague's book, Ghetto Side, by Jill Iovine, and its real world and heroic depiction of homicide detectives.
Yeah, my name's on that book because I blurbed it because I liked it a lot. She's a really good reporter, and on that case, she got deep inside what I'm trying to do in fiction. She got it in nonfiction, which is probably a harder thing to do. So yeah, that's a good book. I liked it.
Harry likes jazz. Does that reflect your likes? The music referenced seems well researched.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't always. I didn't grow up listening to jazz. I was, more rock and roll and blues and stuff like that. But when I was, I think it's cool when you have a character that has a musical identity. And it's a way of building character, like what they listen to says something about them. And so when I was putting together Bosch 30 years ago, I wanted him to listen to jazz because I was trying to build this guy who had a badge. He was an insider in the justice system, but he felt like an outsider. And I think more people like rock and roll than they like jazz. Jazz is, I think, a smaller musical identity, and that was supporting this guy who felt like an outsider. And jazz is also can be very melancholy, and again, my thinking in the beginning, and again, I had no idea that I'd be writing about this guy for 30 years. I was only worried about one book, writing one book as well as I could. And I just thought in my mind, if I had a visual on jazz, even though it's something you hear, it was cigarette smoke, like twirling and going up in a dark room. And that really spoke to me about how, Harry Bosch would be. And, most of the great jazz musicians, whether through drug addiction or other things, have had very difficult times getting to the point where they can make this art, make this sound. And I think Harry would connect with that because he's had a difficult path as well. So there's all these background things that kind of went into that choice. And I'm a reporter at heart, so I did my research and I started listening to stuff, and came across this one musician, LA based guy named Frank Morgan, whose sound, his saxophone, just I thought really spoke to the character I was creating. And so Harry and jazz was kind of born.
Uh, I love that. And LA was a great jazz city. I wish there was a little more out there about Central Avenue, but Linnell George is doing the good work keeping that scene alive for folks. As the second half of that question, someone asked if Renee has a favorite music genre, and does that reflect on other music you like, or have you come to discover music because of that?
I kind of have dropped the ball on that. I had it in a few books, and then I'll write a book and I'll realize, oh, she didn't listen to any music in this. She hears what Harry's hearing when she comes to his house, that kind of thing. But there was I forget which one it was, but there was one where she was getting into the vibe in a car where they were going to do a kind of a SWAT style arrest of somebody, and she had a playlist, and it's not jazz, it's more current music, and I named a few songs that she listens to, and so there's a little bit there, but that's where I've been underwhelming. I need to develop her sound better next time out.
Always new things to explore. I also like this. Have you ever thought about using the Apple Pan as a location?
Yeah, I should. It's a little bit out of the world where Harry usually is, which is Hollywood. He doesn't go west of La Cienega too much. But I like that place. It's got great history, and so it could show up. Thanks for the suggestion. Might use that.
Well, what if that happens? I hope Veronica Spencer knows that it's because of her question. Let's see.
I see somebody said Langers. That's another good one I should put in there. That's more in Harry's type of. That's more of a Harry location, I think.
Oh. So you were asked, do you write both in LA and Florida? And I'm curious, as someone who has asked you this years ago, if that changed at all over the course of the pandemic.
Well, I write wherever I am. It's a reporter's trick. There's no writer's block in journalism. And so that was good training for me. So I can, write planes, trains, automobiles, where I'm at, I can write. I don't have to have a certain spot. So yeah, I write all over the place. And as far as the pandemic went, yeah, I was in LA the whole time. In fact, my first travels have been in the last month, as I've done some stuff to promote this book and so forth. But yeah, I spent last 18 months living in LA, whenever you can date back the big lockdown or big moment that the pandemic gripped us.
Yeah. I have a couple questions here actually about Renee surfing in this book. Some folks have asked about her switching to surfing from paddling. And then I feel like there was a second surfing related question. Oh, what type of research have you done on surfing related to it being a hobby of Renee's?
Not a lot. I mean, I personally was a high school surfer and left it behind. Probably surfed one time since high school, but that really was inspired by the real detective who inspired the whole um, Renee Ballard character. And I guess I shouldn't spoil this. I think I should let people think I'm some kind of a creative genius, but I'm not. I'm really good, I think, at identifying things that people tell me and using them or finding the way to use them. And so that whole surfing after work and sleeping in a tent came from the real detective, LAPD detective who inspired the character. So I just took elements of her real life when she worked the midnight shift and gave them to Renee. And you said something about switching from paddling to surfing. People like that, like the real person, do both. Because sometimes the waves aren't there, but you want to be on the water, so you paddle, and vice versa. So I think she does a little bit of everything.
Nice. Good. Oh, and someone suggested that perhaps she can attempt scuba diving at some point too.
I'm
A
thinking
lot more training involved.
Yeah, I'm too old to research that.
Are there any outstanding crime reporters that you follow on a consistent basis?
Yeah, I read about 3 papers, but I read the Los Angeles Times, and follow the crime stuff. Is not to like get ideas or something. That's rare that I've gotten an idea for a book from, watching the news or reading the news. There's a guy at the LA Times who's also writing some really good fiction named James Quayle, and his second book came out about a month ago. And he's really doing some good stuff. Although he hasn't said anything in LA yet. He used to be a reporter in New Jersey, so his first 2 books are set in New Jersey, but he's now been in LA for quite a while, like 5 or 6 years. So I expect to see a LA based crime novel from the guy who is essentially doing what I did 30 years ago.
Yeah, I would love to see that. And for anybody who's looking for his books, we carry them, but they are currently on back order. I was checking on them 2 days ago. I'm like,
oh, really?
Yeah, waiting to see when they would be back. And relatedly, who do you read in your genre? What other mystery writers, crime writers are you reading?
I try to read all over the place, but I also have to admit I'm not reading in the genre. I write the genre because I was consumed by it. But then now that I write it, it's hard for me to read a crime novel without kind of like a work eye on it, like, seeing what they're doing, maybe learning from them, that kind of thing. So I usually read nonfiction, as an escape type thing. But some of the books I've read recently was Quilly's most recent book, which the title is I'm blanking on. S.A. Cosby's book, Razor Blade Tears, is a really good book. Yeah, so I don't know, I kind of jump around. The book I'm reading now is a nonfiction book about the history of the movie The Godfather. It's called Take the Gun, Leave the Cannoli.
Yeah. I think because I'm used to being in LA bookstores, I'm like, yeah, that's been a popular one. People love reading about film history.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, You also got asked if there are any plans to do a film or limited series based on the Jack McAvoy books or Renee Ballard, since we talked about Harry and Mickey earlier.
Well, I'd love for all that to happen, but I don't get to make the decisions in Hollywood. Every time a book comes out, like this book just came out this week, it sparks some interest in Renee Ballard, so maybe something will happen there. My last year, I did a Jack McAvoy book called Fair Warning, and that's been optioned by a film producer who really seems intent on getting it made. And I got to write the screenplay, and I'm in the process of doing the second rewrite on it, and then hopefully we'll take it out there and see if somebody wants to be Jack McAvoy.
I'm sure someone will. Yeah. Oh, and someone has asked if you would share your reading lists on your website because they would like to be able to read whatever books you recommend, which I think is high praise.
Yeah, I mean, I should. I do that every now and then. I usually have like a summer reading list or something. It gets a little political because I know so many writers, and then it becomes, am I just putting them on there because I know them, or why aren't they on there, and all that kind of stuff. So it might be better not to do that, but I'll take it under advisement.
Love it. Oh, let's see. This question came in. Did Harry Bosch ever run into real life and legendary detective Jigsaw John?
Did Harry Bosch ever?
Well,
his history would have them overlapping. I met him one time when I was a reporter. I happened to be in the robbery homicide thing. I think it was his last year, and he was there telling stories. But yeah, Harry Bosch probably knew
him. Oh, and someone else asked, do you still do research for Bosch to evolve?
I'm not sure what that means.
I think it means, are you still learning about new things for Bosch to be interested in, and new skills, new hobbies?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think
music.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of the coin of the realm that he has to always be evolving, and there's things that keep him evolving. He has a daughter. In this book, he's referencing that she's becoming a cop, and that's a new set of worries for him, and and also through her be able to learn what he hasn't been a policeman who was in uniform for decades, and he's going to get to kind of see that life through his daughter. I mean, that's something I'm planning. The seeds are planted in this book. We don't see Maddie. It's one of the rare times we don't see his daughter in a book, but we know what's going on in her life.
Nice. Okay, this question goes back to some of the television talk. Do you remember your feelings when you first saw the first episodes of Bosch, the show, and seeing what had been your work in one form take another?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing moment to actually see something being filmed. I remember, I think it was the third season of the show. We weren't doing the books in order. We were taking what we needed from whatever book we wanted. We chose, for the first season, we chose a story that we thought would be more emotional than the first book. But we eventually got around to the first book, and I watched this scene. The first book, keep in mind, when I wrote it, I had no idea if it would ever be published, if anyone would ever read it. And the very first scene, I mentioned it on the video, was up in Hollywood Reservoir when this kid is hiding in the bushes and witnesses people drag a body out of a Jeep and stick it into a drainage pipe. And so we filmed a version of that. It was a little bit different, but it was a remarkable night for me because I was like 20, almost 30 years later, from when I wrote that scene, it was being filmed. And I did remember when I was writing that, I had no idea if it would ever even be published. And so not only was it published, but the character still thrives. And now all these years later, there's a TV show and that scene's being filmed. That was quite a night for me.
I can imagine. Let's see.
I can see some questions here. I did not catch that fish.
It's
an antique. I bought it in an antique shop. I like to tell people that, no, I didn't catch it. Hemingway caught it. So
I love that. I'm glad you spotted that. I was trying to figure out the origin of the comments about the marlin. So I'm glad you're ahead of me on that one.
Actually,
do you plan to write another Lincoln Lawyer in the near future? And why was there such a long time gap between Gods of Guilt and Laws of Innocence?
I can't explain the time gaps on anything. It's, I just kind of write what is inspiring me at the moment. And Law of Innocence was probably inspired because I was involved in formulating the TV show, and so Mickey Haller was in my head a lot, and so that led to a inspiration for a story. But no, I'm not finished with him either, and I'm sure there'll be another, at least one other, or maybe more. Depends on how long I get to write, but I'm sure we'll see him again.
Yeah. So this one is a fascinating idea as Harry continues to get older. Have you ever considered doing a short story about Harry as a rookie officer in Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, not a short story. I'm gathering string, which is like a research phrase. Because at some point I'd love to write a book about Harry Bosch's origins as a cop, and maybe it starts in Vietnam. And I said in the books he became a cop in 1972, and I did that on purpose because 1972 was a very eventful year in Los Angeles. And in one of the books I say he was at the SLA house where was the shootout that happened in 1972. Where they thought Patty Hearst was in this house that was set on fire from all the gunfire and so forth, and that Bosch was there that day. So I have like these markers that I've mentioned just in passing in the books, but I'd like to string that all together. And at some point in my life, it will be quite a challenge because to me, it's a historical time. It's not contemporary. Like every book I've written has been very contemporary, set in the year it's published. So to break from that and go back 50 years to 1972 is going to be quite the challenge. And and maybe I've been working towards that for a while, but hopefully I'll get to that.
Yeah. Let's see. This question is about the mention you made earlier of Harry Bosch's relationship with Maddie. They said it's so right on and realistic. How have you accomplished this? Is it based on another real father-daughter relationship?
Yeah, by the way, someone just corrected me. This SLA shootout was in 74. Yes, I meant Bosch is a rookie in 72, but he's still a cop in a uniform in 74. So I've done different markers for him in those early years that I can hopefully go back and string together. Let's see. Well, I'm a father of a daughter who happens to be the same age as Maddie. So I kind of grew up with a research subject in my house that was very helpful in the inspiration and forming of Maddie. And some of the things that my daughter has said to me, Maddie has said to Bosch. Some of the things she's texted to me, Maddie has texted to Bosch. So you take, again, no creative genius here. I just take from the people in my life, take inspiration and take anecdotes, and sometimes take bigger stories.
Oh, it's excellent journalism training coming through there, taking the real stuff and using that as your material. uh, Someone asked, where did you grow up and how much time do you spend in LA? Assuming it's not a year where it's the only, or a year and a half where it's the only place you can be. Yeah, where did you grow up?
I grew up in South Florida. I was born in Philadelphia though, but when I was young, my family moved to South Florida, and then I came to LA when I was 30 years old. And I spend most of my time in LA. I live in LA. Somebody said, "Are you a taxpayer in Florida?" And I'm not. I mean, I'm a resident of California.
How long does it take you to write a book?
The cycle I'm on is I start writing in December or November, and then I turn my books in July. So, whatever that is, 7 or 8, 9 months. But sometimes stories come faster, and I end up able to do 2 books or publish 2 books in a year. I don't write 2 in a year. They just end up being published, but it's like I write 3 over 2 years. That's probably confusing, but basically my cycle is to start writing books right around now. I've written the first chapter of the next book, and it will come to an end, and the writing process will come to an end at the end of June, probably.
Excellent. Well, I think once everyone is done reading The Dark Hours, they'll be looking forward to next fall when we get the next book from you. We are rapidly coming up on time. So I just wanted to thank everyone. Thank you to our audience for joining us from wherever in the world you might be, whether it's, within the Hollywood precinct or somewhere in an entirely different country and continent. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you especially, Michael, for choosing to partner with Chevaliers for this event tonight. It is such a delight for us to get to host you from the comfort of our own homes. And for all the folks who have asked, this is being recorded. It will be on the Chevalier's YouTube channel in the next couple days. So if you joined late, if you know somebody who would have loved this conversation, you can find it on our YouTube channel. And I have once again put the link into the chat for how you can order your copy of The Dark Hours to be signed by Michael Connelly. And of course, if you're local, come by, and I will put a bunch of books in your hands about Los Angeles restaurants, Los Angeles locations. We'll help you bring even more of this to life. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks for having me. I should add, if you order the book, I'm going to go over the Chevaliers in a few days, and I can personalize it for you, whatever you want to do. But once again, thanks for supporting the store and supporting me and Harry Bosch and Renee Ballard. And if you get the book, I hope you enjoy it.
I hope so too. Thank you all, everyone. Good night.